This is Rob Stone from Fox Sports.
This is Jochen Graf.
Hi, I'm Neil Collins.
You are listening to the Unused Substitutes.
The Unused Substitutes.
And you're listening to the Unused Substitutes.
Get off the bench!
Hey there, Little Red Riding Hood! I got a problem and it's complicated. Going through changes and I just can't ignore the signs. There and now it's so loud it hurts. Hear me, fella, hear me out when the full moon is out.
Off the road, ball's gonna bounce down. It's free in the box. Bicycle kick! Goal! Rowdies! What a play! What a shot! And it's 1-0 Rowdies!
Good evening, everybody. You're listening to another episode of the Unused Substitutes, your Rowdies Talk Radio, the Green and Gold Gospel. We are live on Radio St. Pete, part of the Beautiful Game Network, presented by Roughneck Scarves. My name is Matt. Got a couple different voices here tonight. Joining me, as usual, the man who was social distancing before it was a popular thing. Steven, how are you doing?
Happy that everything has gone perfectly A-OK and smooth setting up tonight.
Stop it. You're going to jinx it.
I'm just saying,
Stop
it's
it.
perfect so far.
Stop it.
I'm glad we fixed your problem. That was an important piece of the puzzle there.
Well, since like all of it runs through here anyway, it's every piece of the puzzle. It seems like. Speaking of that, my daughter has a puzzle over on the table that she was trying to get through, and then the cats jumped up, and now she's got some more work ahead of her now.
There you go.
That's how we're staying sane in the quarantine. So we've been doing this kind of bi-weekly thing, but you know the team is back in training. The league is alternately coming up with new ideas for ways to return to play while still not having any issues with the players' union at all. So we're kind of doing a little bit of back to the regular schedule, except you know there's really not much Rowdies news to talk about except for esports, and we'll get to that later. But we wanted to bring on do some interview shows, bring some other people on. I'm a teacher. I hear myself talk all day long. I know it's not the greatest thing in the world to listen to. So we are joined tonight by a guy who we've pretty much just since the quarantine started been saying, look, let's summarize what Jeff wrote this week for The Athletic, without giving it all away, because, I'm sure they wouldn't appreciate that. They'd like people to go sign up and read it instead. We're joined by Jeff Rueter from The Athletic. Jeff, first of all, tell me I said it right.
You did.
Nice.
You did. It was about 2 months ago, finally, after years of doing radio spots. I was just like, maybe I should just phonetically put it in my Twitter bio.
I think I saw it in there, and that's like I said, my day job is middle school teacher, and like the first month or so is just trying to figure out who's a Steven, who's a Stefan, who's a Stevan. It's like I've actually there's a silver lining to the quarantine in some cases. First off, for our listeners who may not be subscribers or may not have read your stuff, tell us a little bit about yourself. What do you do? And then lastly, how did you manage to start getting a bunch of USL content into The Athletic?
I have been writing about soccer, lower division and Major League Soccer in the United States since 2015. I started actually with a podcast who had some friendly banter with you back in the NASL days with the Two United Fans show. When the team went up to Major League Soccer, I buried my fan allegiance at Blaine at the National Sports Center, and ever since I've been covering the team completely separate, which is very easy to do when a team makes that move from the lower league to Major League Soccer, because only the crest is the same and maybe 2 or 3 players who are all cast out within a year or two inevitably. So have been covering that, broadened my scope once I started covering Major League Soccer in 2017 to a national scope, but always kind of kept following the lower leagues. 2017 was the NASL's final season, but it was also Minnesota United's first season in Major League Soccer, so it was really about establishing that. 2018 then started to go back, and I think it was about August 2018 where I put out a pretty substantial report regarding conditions for players in the United Soccer League. And at that point, I was looking at, New York Red Bulls too used an hourly punch card system to pay their players, and some other clubs were, putting highly incentivized contracts for players making $0 guaranteed, which, by the way, still goes on.
Mm-hmm.
So in that case, that got a really strong response, and not just a strong response as of like, wow, what content that we saw. It was like, write more about this league. And so I started covering it a little bit more. Early 2019 picked up the pace a bit more. And since early 2019, that has been as big a part of my coverage as a national writer at The Athletic as any other topic. Minnesota United, Major League Soccer, you name it. It's pretty equal. And honestly, at this point, the USL is kind of the main beat. But I mean, really, the reason that I'm covering it as often as I am, it's because of readers. It's because of subscribers. It's because of fans who are asking for more, who are saying there's some really good stories to be told, or that they appreciate being able to read about it and read about more than just the team that they follow, which often, having covered a team for an independent blog back in the lower division days, I completely understand that I wasn't terribly well versed with who was on the Rowdies when they would come to Minnesota until about the week before, when inevitably someone interviews someone else who covers that team,
Mm-hmm.
and you do your sort of 15-minute segment, and you feel like you know exactly what's going on with Juan Arango or whatever, and then you go out and you do your thing. So being able to do it at a broader scale was something that I really personally enjoy, and it's, it's fun. Right? Like, it's writing about soccer, it's writing about professional soccer and stories that go under-recognized. So yes, the stories lately have been pretty dark, and they've been pretty necessary reports about player conditions and payment and all yada, yada, yada. But it is still exactly what I'd want to be doing at this moment of this pandemic, I guess.
I know Steven's going to jump in and ask you about that, the big story second, but I want to, you said something there in the beginning about how when the team made the move up, everything's different, everything's different except for the crest, which, tweaked a little bit. And, we had that MLS to St. Pete thing going on. How legitimate it really was, I don't know if we'll ever know for sure. And initially I was kind of like, the stadium looks cool. It's a way to keep the ownership involved in spending money. But as more and more time goes on, especially with the, you saw the stuff with the Columbus Crew starting to happen. From your perspective, how different was it when the team moved? I mean, you talked about how you buried your kind of your fanhood, your fanship there at NSC. Which that reminds me of something I want to talk about NSC later too.
Sure,
I'll come back to it. But how different was it maybe that first season or two than what it was like in NASL?
Well, probably the most obvious difference is that in the NASL, Minnesota United was good, and in Major League Soccer, Minnesota United was very bad. So there's a pretty sharp difference in terms of the scale of stories, where you're no longer writing Lance Lang, Stefano Pino, that's all it's going to take, and Minnesota United should be challenging the Cosmos and then seriously underperforming in 2016, right? And so going into that season, that final lower league season in the NASL, when the Rowdies were still in the league as well, you went and covered games, and I was still, in the crowd, and then would go on the field afterwards to interview Joe Cole or whatever after his bicycle kick. But there was still just a strange kind of, not even strange, but unique in retrospect, just how collective, not even just like the players and the fans. Obviously, there's an incredibly different dynamic in the lower leagues compared to Major League Soccer, but you're also looking at the fans and the fans. And that even the people who are just kind of showing up to just take in one game, aren't season ticket holders, aren't part of the supporter section, whatever. If they went out to Blaine, which is a 25-minute drive from Minneapolis or St. Paul, they want to be there. So even all of the fans, there's a lot less window shopping, which makes for a very interesting dynamic. And then there's no disrespect for the major sports leagues in the country, but like if I go to a Twins game, for example, I'm not necessarily going to be really into it and doing the scorecard and all that stuff. I just want to go check out something different, see what it's like, and then eventually go home. I think that's just a part of sports fandom. But I think the other parts of it, the rosters, players playing in the first division probably have a little bit of a different dynamic and interpersonality maybe. I'm trying to find the nicest way to put these things without being incendiary in any which direction, one way or the other. But maybe another part of it is that because coverage of Major League Soccer has grown so much over the last decade in particular, there's less just kind of organic fan/writers that doesn't really exist at a high level in Major League Soccer, whereas it's the lifeblood of covering the USL or was the lifeblood of covering the NSL, all that stuff. Like, it's vital. Sources, like Beautiful Game Network or Midfield Press, Stock Takes, like these are for a lot of fans the only outlets that they have covering the sport, which again goes back to why am I covering the league? Because, well, it's a legitimate professional league, and we've been able to do some really, I think, some really good both storytelling and reporting that with the national scope we're uniquely positioned to do.
Okay.
Well,
Question at all, but there we go. Sorry about that.
That's all right.
Well, I'll definitely say that I know from our perspective, it's awesome to see USL national level coverage through Athletic in whatever form that takes. So I know that as fans that are starving for content, because obviously, again, as you said, for a lot of clubs, there really is not much in the way of, reporting outside of fan-run podcasts and things of that nature. So I know that we appreciate it. I'll say this too. Hope it does look like Adrian Heath is starting to turn things around a little bit up there. So I hope that you guys up in Minnesota are having a better season whenever you guys start playing this year and this calendar year. But so I do
got a very good 2019. I think that the fans are pretty happy after what last season looked like. Yeah.
I mean, from an outsider, my perspective would be they better be. in all fairness. Now I don't know about Matt, but I'll just say this real quick. I've actually been to NSC Stadium because me and a group of friends actually drove to the Swansea City, Minnesota friendly up in 2014. We actually drove up there because some of my friends are really big friends with a lot of people up in Minnesota, and I'm a diehard Swansea City fan. Makes sense. Yeah, I've actually had the chance to go up there and go visit the club at least once before it moved over to MLS. So that was that's cool that I have a bit of a connection there for that club and that old stadium. So which it was a great experience. I loved everything about Minneapolis. That was a great time. I was so happy to make that trip. But let's go into some of the grimdark here of what the world is now and where we're sitting. Obviously, the biggest story that's happening right now, and certainly something that happened over the last 24 to 48 hours, you've seen a little bit more public news about it, is everything in regards to the compensation negotiations right now between USL Players Union, and how that's going to look when the teams actually start playing again. For those that haven't, that listen to us but haven't seen that coverage or haven't run across it, is there any way, give us a brief summary real quick about where the teams are. We know the USLPA just gave officially their counter proposal to USL. So just for those audience members that haven't caught up exactly with some of the ins and outs of that detail, just give us a simple recap of what's kind of going on right now.
I'm giving myself a minute and I'm staring at my clock. So what's ended up happening is that as play has continued to go on as expected, clubs are in a strain. Clubs are struggling financially. They've been looking at various ways, whether it's governmental loans, whether it's help from the league, whatever. They've been looking at different ways to be able to kind of save and make up for the lack of gate revenue, which every lower division club kind of operates off of. As a part of that, we've now reached the part where they've asked players for pay cuts. The initial pay cuts would have seen $1,000 untouched for players with housing, and then after that, increasing increments of $20,000 on the next hundreds and thousands and whatever. So they could have lost a significant amount of money. The players can't afford to do that because most of them live below $20,000 a year, and so then they came back and were requesting $10,000 or 10% cut, but also asking the league to chip into the clubs. And now, yesterday, the Athletic learned and reported this morning about the counter proposal to the counter proposal, where the league is saying 30% cuts after the first $1,300 or $1,500 a month, which is barely above the federal poverty line, and then also saying no minimum salary for the future, which is something the players wanted to work into any deal like this, and also saying 2 weeks of severance if the season gets canceled. Is the league's latest proposal. The players have yet to get back to that.
Now, just for those that hear that, because obviously the drop there at the very end is the thing that scares everybody. The concept of a 2020 season not happening at all. Now, something that we discussed when we were talking on the show a couple weeks ago was the fact that the league still has to plan for everything. There are contingencies that they have to consider for every scenario under the sun, up to and including the possibility of a canceled season. though as things kind of look right now, it doesn't really appear, at least optimistically, that that's actually going to happen. We're going to probably play something. Somebody's kicking a soccer ball in USL in the year 2020. Again, somebody's going to do it. So let me jump into, and I know that in our pregame, Matt was going to kind of probably hit this question up a little bit, but let's piggyback off of that statement and say, what do you see right now as the more likely scenario for what USL looks like if and when it does come back in 2020? Are we looking at a truncated season being the more likely option at this point, where they'll play some sort of a shortened tournament, or maybe just shortened regular season in general before kicking into playoffs? Do you see the league still actively trying to play a full schedule? Because obviously, like, even up to a couple of weeks ago, I think last week, Jake Edwards said publicly that was still an option on the table, was trying to play a full season of games. At this point, if you had to take a guess or where things are leaning right now, based on what you've heard, what do you think is the more likely scenario at this point?
Well, I've dropped when from if and when. You're officially to the point now where it's not a given there will be a 2020 USL season. I know earlier this week, one member of USL headquarters was on a podcast in Phoenix and said that, yes, we will find some way to play a game. And yes, that is very much still the intention. We have not hit the point where the league is operating under the pretense of canceling the season and finding a way to make that work. It's so far from that. That's just not true. But at this point, you've already started to see a force majeure clause, an obstacle you're not able to overcome, and therefore player contracts should be adjusted. That clause is what is at the center of these discussions I highlighted in the last question. That clause is not coming up in discussion unless there's a chance of canceling the season, and a very realistic one that they want to make sure is worked into every single player agreement in the event of a season being canceled. These questions of 2-week severance, they don't just ask that just for fun. That is something that they really are making sure gets into the discussion, into the framework, and into just the club's operating plan, purely because it's on the table. It's not when, it's if. If it does happen, they've already looked at a hub model. So like what you see with Major League Soccer and the NBA, both looking at Orlando as their possible complex to finish out their season, or in MLS's case, is play a tournament World Cup style. The USL has looked at that. Tucson was one location. They've looked at a few more. But the cost of getting 35 clubs who are already asking their players for pay cuts, being able to travel, to house, to afford testing, frequent enough to meet federal guidelines, I don't think that's realistic either. So you're looking at, so hub was that one. There's another one with a 3-letter term for pods. There we go. For different, you do 4 different ones. So you have the Northeast, Southeast, Northwest, Southwest, right? Or something like that. You break it up, you have 18 per, and then you do a playoff from there, kind of a divisional model, which is something The Athletic reported on last month as well, which if you're resuming play and saying you're not going to try to condense into one location, whether it's 8 teams or 35 teams, and instead you're going to be playing out a season, traveling to and from, some games at home, some games away, all that stuff, then you're looking at an abridged schedule. And I would personally say making it divisionally heavy makes the most sense, just to be able to find a way to actually have something resembling a table with some sort of strength and competitive equality in terms of scheduling. So not when, it's not if, but when, but if it does happen, I do think that those are some of the most likely outcomes.
I have one follow-up to this question, and it's something that Matt thought of actually weeks and weeks ago. That is kind of a frightening concept in any scenario. And well, not in any, obviously they play a full season if that's even possible. But in a truncated scenario, the teams that have played a game this season, do you think that result would count, or will they find a way to incorporate the games that have already played into a truncated season? Because the Rowdies find themselves in a unique position in the fact that that's officially the first time we've ever won in New York. We've never actually, New Jersey, but that we haven't actually beaten the Red Bulls too up there in New York, and we did it on our home on the season opener this year, and it would be absolute gut punch to actually lose that and have it stricken from the record if they decide to start with a clean slate. Do you, kind of as a hypothetical, do you have any idea about where the league is thinking as far as if they're going to try and, at least if they do a truncated, if they'll count those games, or how do you think that would work?
I mean, they're talking about it, and I think they're erring on the side of what I'm about to say too, but obviously everything is so up in the air that could change tomorrow. But it's just from the outside, like that's a really cool win. That I'm really glad that you got that experience. You have to cancel that game, because how are you going to equate the importance of that with Pittsburgh not playing a game? Or how are you going to be able to balance that with San Diego and Tacoma in the West playing 2 games? Because they had a game the day before everything canceled because the players were already up in Tacoma. So you really can't. If you're going to try to say that there's some sort of competitive balance, you have to cancel all of those games. And you can say it was a real meaningful result because it was a competitive game. But if it's me, and I think this is kind of the guiding principle, you can't really keep an uneven amount of games tacked onto the front, because then you're going to end up saying, okay, well, then do we try to cut that back, those games? But then you have 3 teams who didn't play a game in opening weekend and still haven't played a game, so how are they going to figure that out? I'm sorry, but I don't think that there's a way that you can say that there's equality in terms of each team's season and keep those early results.
Got it. So Jeff is biased against the Rowdies getting wins in New York. I see. Yeah, I went back to that. I was out picking some stuff up this afternoon and got gasoline for the first time since the middle of March. Like I've had a birthday since the last time I got gas, and I was thinking about it because Red Bull would be one. It's one of those teams. Were Red Bull one of the ones that we're supposed to play them 3 times in the original schedule, and it's one of those like you could factor that in because it's a team we were gonna. But for those teams who haven't played at all, and then like you said, the teams that have already played 2 games because they played a midweek game, I don't teach math, so I'm not going to try and work that one out.
And I think it's just easier for you to say we're putting it in divisions of 8 or 9, and that's the league.
Right.
And so I guess maybe if you want, you can say, okay, look at the results, and if they happen to play and they're really pushing for it, like if Tampa and New York would end up in the same division, which I don't think that makes sense personally if you're looking at how many teams are in the Southeast.
Yeah, this isn't baseball. We can't do that.
Right. I would say at that point you can look and say maybe they get to keep that 1 game off so they have a little extra time to rest, a little advantage. But then again, it's an advantage. It's not equal. They're not playing in the same sort of season. I don't think you can really do that.
Yeah, the only other thing I thought of, I don't know if either of you guys listened to the Set Piece Menu podcast. It's a couple commentators and a former England player. What they were talking about today is one of their topics was the Premier League returning, and they suggested. Actually, I guess they said they heard this from the Anfield Wrap, which I'm a bad Liverpool fan. Like I listened to it a lot, but not every single episode. They proposed doing the Scottish Premier League method, which is not, according to popular opinion, 2 big teams yelling at each other and then Hearts gets relegated, but that everybody plays each other once and then they split the table. The top half plays the top half again, the bottom half plays the bottom half again, and you get a slightly truncated schedule and slightly more competitive. I don't know if that's something you could implement in this going forward. But there was talk about this divisional format maybe being something that lasted beyond this season. If it was something they did, like that could be something they took a look at too. I got 2 things I'm gonna tack on to Steven's question at the end there. You talked about how it's definitely a possibility about canceling the season. I was just reading in an article on the BGN website about how some of the players are convinced that this 2-week severance pay is the sign that that's what they want to do, because they get out of it with very little expense compared to their contract. We haven't heard anybody publicly say it, but there's got to be some clubs that are at risk of not existing if there's no games this year. I would assume, especially I'm just leaning towards like some Western Conference teams seem to pop in my head first. Like, it could be a serious. I know maybe they're leaning towards getting these games going just to keep some of these clubs alive, because unlike maybe any other league above them, these clubs are depending on this match day revenue in order to survive. So It's a tricky situation that both of these sides are going to have to work out. Luckily, it'll give you lots of stuff to write about.
Yeah, lucky or unlucky, you tell me. I think that there's a potential for it. I think there was already potential for a few teams that even playing 2020, they were already kind of just playing out the string.
Right.
And realistically, there wasn't much of a future beyond that. And now you throw this on, you throw in an entire lack of revenue. I will say one club suddenly seems more likely, and I'm not going to say a name yet, but there's one club that is suddenly more likely to play in 2021 because they figured that they had, the player stuff for 2 seasons, but a lot of the operational stuff only ready for 1.
Okay.
But this way, maybe it's 2021 instead of 2022, which is a really strange way to operate, but it's a choice, right? So that's one. But I think League One, even more than the championship, who knows? Because the requirements by U.S. Soccer and by the USL in terms of financial capital to own a club are lower in the 3rd division than the 2nd division. So there is, a non-zero chance that they might not be able to keep the club afloat. And there's also a chance for championship clubs as well. I can think of a couple in the East, actually, that are at very serious kind of life and death decision-making moments. And I know that it's hyper-dramatized, but everything in soccer is hyper-dramatized, right?
Right.
So, there is serious potential that COVID will heighten those chances for multiple clubs.
And that kind of leads into my next question: is what? I'm trying to think of the best way to say it. We're trying to figure out how to just get back on the field now, but there's the possibility of some long-term changes for how this league operates and how clubs operate and how game day operates. One of the things we were talking about a week or so ago was, the Rowdies just put in a standing section behind the goal. Now you probably can't have a ton of people standing in there. They're going to have to worry about, spacing out or whatever now. But have you heard about or do you foresee, what are the kind of long-term changes do you foresee coming out of this when things get back to whatever normal is going to look like?
I think you're more likely to see more spelled out definitions for how the clubs will operate if there's another stoppage in play. I would imagine setting up protocols so that they're not learning on the fly and reacting in real time and trying to redecide every single decision with every bit of new information. I think that they're going to find a way to avoid that. I would imagine it's more likely you'll see, I'm trying to think of what they were already considering, because they were considering adding an extra sub for head injuries. Mm-hmm. But maybe you say we need that 4th sub in general for a season because every player is going to be 16 months removed from their last game.
Right.
And that's not great. If that's your rationale for it, sign more fit players. But, realistically, of course, I completely understand. I think that there's going to be some serious questions about fatigue. There's going to be some serious questions about quality of play as a result of both the fatigue and just not being able to train with the team for all this time as well. Players who come back after 6 months of being a free agent take more time to get up to match fitness, and they'll tell you this themselves, than a player who finishes a contract and immediately goes to another club. Every single player at this point is going to have that 6-month gap. Mm-hmm. So that might be something you see. Stadiums with the safe standing and how are they going to space out their supporter sections and everything. I think that'll be team by team, but I wouldn't be surprised if there's some teams who are like, do we need this? And their fans aren't going to like that at all. So I can't imagine those will go far, but I would not be surprised if those conversations were initiated and framed in the context of proximity. And we probably won't be social distancing to 6 feet by the time we're able to go back to the stadium. But people probably aren't going to be quite as comfortable going shoulder to shoulder and possibly, accidentally tasting the neighbor's beer in a goal celebration from about an inch away. I think everyone's going to be a little more weirded out by that. So there might have to be some protocols in terms of spacing, which might mean that some stadiums hold fewer people, which means they have to space out their seats more, which could also hurt revenue. So there are some really micro level changes that can stem from this. It's realistic, but I think the reality of it as well is that we don't know yet, because we don't know if we're in the second half of this or the first half.
Right.
And those conversations are so different if we're in month 3 of 4 compared to month 3 of 12.
So I heard something the other day. Actually, I saw someone on Twitter mention it, and then I went back and read the article, and it was Don Garber had mentioned that with all that's going on, he sees a probability of St. Louis and Sacramento's entry into MLS being delayed by maybe at least a season, and that it brought me back to something that I think you wrote back in January about how there's this potential for St. Louis FC to be around for this season and then maybe not next year at all as they get ready. If the and this just like I said, just randomly popped in my head. It has nothing to do with the Rowdies at all, but there's not a lot of news. So if these delays are these movements are delayed for St. Louis and Sacramento, do you think St. Louis FC hangs around for another season or two, or do they, if they've kind of committed to this season and that's it, then do they just do that and keep on that schedule?
Yeah. I think St. Louis is going to be a very interesting situation and a very different situation than Charlotte Independence and Austin Bold. Because with the Independence and Bold, it never looked like they were in the plans of the MLS team coming in. Right. And it was pretty clear that Charlotte, with Dave Tepper's money, was going to be a completely different entity than Independence, and that Austin FC with Matthew McConaughey and whatever else was not going to be part of Raceway of the Americas, Circuit of the Americas. But with St. Louis FC, there was this weird, unspoken, unanswered dynamic about some shared ownership, shared executives. The principal owner of the MLS franchise being a season ticket holder for St. Louis FC and going to games quite frequently. So there always seemed to be some kind of relationship there. Where it gets tricky is that simply acquiring the team means buying a nonprofit because it's owned and operated by Scott Gallagher, the youth academy out there. And that is a much more difficult thing to do than buying another soccer club. So they have to work through some sort of legal hoops. And I think those were pretty unexpected and unanticipated, and frankly, pretty undesirable at this point. But maybe there's now a look at saying, look, St. Louis will still be able to join in 2022, but we can't afford to suddenly have a full 2 years without any games in St. Louis. How do we find a way to keep St. Louis FC operating in 2021 so that we have someone to pass the baton if St. Louis FC is unable to continue beyond that season? That's not unrealistic, not at all.
So basically, it's going to be St. Louis FC to Nisa.
You get to tell you what, you tweet that.
No, I am happily staying out of Nisa Twitter. And actually, that brought me back to one thing is they've USL's talked about for the last 2-3 years about bringing in this Central Conference as a way to keep there's talk about bringing in Des Moines and bringing in Milwaukee, and I think Cleveland was another area that was mentioned, and St. Louis has kind of been that back and forth between the Eastern Conference, Western Conference, and you don't hear any talk about the Central Conference anymore. I don't know if that's due more towards Cincinnati leaving or what else has happened, but it just seems like that's another part of the plan that may not be part of the plan anymore.
Yeah, so I think 4 divisions, conferences, take your pick, make more sense than 3 for a league that will be pushing 40 teams. You could do 3, have 12 per, but I think there's a certain point where you also say, okay, but with how we're expanding, does it make sense to keep Tacoma in the same division as San Diego? Does it make sense to have Hartford, Connecticut going to Southern Florida? And everything in between. Is there a way you can avoid that? When I was trying to draw up when they were working on the 4 divisions and splitting the conferences, Missouri was by far the most difficult area to try and suss out. And it's not just St. Louis FC, by the way. It is Sporting Kansas City too. Rest in peace, Wilkes-Barre Rangers. So it's, I don't know. I mean, it's very difficult because the Central at this point would either be pulling way too far east, and you're suddenly talking about, Indy, Louisville, maybe Birmingham, Alabama, and that's not quite right. But maybe some of them are right. Indy makes some sense. Yeah. once you have to start going east of that, that's rough. And when you're starting to look west and you're pulling from the mountain states, also a little bit rough. So you're looking at Texas, obviously. You're looking at hopefully putting a team, if it's me, I'm putting a team in New Orleans over some of these other markets they've been talking about. I'm putting, maybe not Des Moines, maybe Des Moines makes sense, maybe it doesn't make sense, but maybe Omaha will make sense in a few years. And that's a way to get into it. And then you have Des Moines take over in League One. Mm-hmm. That might make a lot of sense. You have Milwaukee, as you mentioned. That could be a good market. You don't have anywhere in Ohio. Cleveland seems like it would have as much potential at first glance that Cincinnati has. I don't think at first glance anyone really saw the true soccer diehards that have come out and made themselves very well heard. And I have a lot of respect for the market in Cincinnati. So I think that that's a sentence I don't think has ever been said before. I have a lot of respect for the market of Cincinnati. Anyway, there are some ways that you can do it. There are some ways that you can make that map work. But I think factoring in north-south might be a higher priority in terms of cutting down travel than keeping it left, center, right.
And obviously this transitions obviously into another topic, because a lot of this depends on what kind of expansion opportunities are even out there, and especially because it's not even right now. The complexity with USL is that it's, to a certain degree, the championship expansion has sort of kind of died down a little bit, because there's obviously all of this surge of interest in League One, especially. And obviously there's upwards of 5 or 6 or even more teams potentially, or ownership groups talking about starting League One teams. Now, here's an interesting question. Obviously, there's an appeal to starting a League One team in general, because obviously they have lower requirements than a championship team. So if you're interested in general of owning a professional soccer franchise, there's an obvious incentive to go with a cheaper option. Sure. Now, there's a question though. Is there potentially another carrot being dangled there for potential groups going into League One? And maybe there's an opportunity there for USL to push teams in that direction. And of course, that comes down to the whole question that everybody's been talking about for probably 20 years. And that's, of course, the soccer war from promotion relegation and that whole concept. Now, is there, do you know, is there any kind of idea there where part of the incentive of getting these teams into League One and building League One is because there's a carrot being dangled about an inter-USL or intra-USL promotion relegation between Championship and League One? Is that part of the reason that we're seeing the surge in League One and the other carrot being dangled there?
It's part of it. I mean, that's undeniable, right? Because you look and say, it's like teams going into the USL or into the NASL in 2015 after it was clear they wouldn't make it to Major League Soccer without proving the market could work. You're looking at Sacramento, you're looking at Cincinnati, you're looking at Indy, attempted that very publicly. You're looking, there are markets like Tampa, Minnesota, those had already had clubs. But these other clubs, kind of the next in bubbling under markets, for a lot of them, you need to prove yourself. You need to prove that there's a fan base. You need to get them energized at the potential of, there's nothing a fan base loves hearing more in the middle of the 2010s than we're working towards Major League Soccer, or Don Garber saying that sweet, sweet phrase of it's not if, but when. Everyone loves that, right? And every market got some version of that. But I think you're looking, that's part of it. I don't think that that's even the main factor, though. I think the main factor, there's two of them. The first one is that the championship is too big. And this whole player versus league negotiation thing has taken away from me being able to actually carve away at something I ran last week, which is the USL fan survey. Over 1,100 USL fans filled this out. There's some really interesting stuff. But one thing that a majority, over 50% of fans said, here's a teaser that no one knows, the USL championship's too big. Fans think that the USL championship's already too big, and they're looking at ways to make it bigger. They have highlighted 5 or 6 markets that are either guaranteed, like Queensboro, like East Bay, or tentatively agreed pending stadium, such as Cleveland, Baltimore, Des Moines, Pawtucket. Like, these, how many more can you have, right? And so I think a big part of it is saying that can't be the priority anymore. The other part of it that feeds into then is that A lot of the people who are really ready to drop $7 to $10 million in the expansion fee have already placed their call. And the people who aren't quite as sure in their market, I'm going to pick on a market that makes sense to me in my brain that has never actually put in a bid, but we're going to use that as an example, okay? If I'm based out of Fargo, North Dakota, if I'm trying to put a team in the Midwest that is west of the Mississippi River, significantly west, that makes some sense for the Western Conference to be able to push some of those other central teams into the East, I'm going Fargo, North Dakota. Fargo, North Dakota is not a championship market. I am not confident in that. There might be that huge college town atmosphere that comes from having both MSU, Mankato, and NDSU right in that little area, and think in the summer we will draw 7,000 fans. And if you can do that, you're a championship market. That's pretty much a given at this point. But you don't know that until you put a team out there. So if you say we're going to pay this year $2 million in a League One expansion fee, and we're going to test the waters, we're going to save $8 million compared to going right to the championship. We're going to be able to operate at a smaller scale. And by the way, in a few years, they will have the ability to earn their way into the championship anyway. And if they can't, well, and they haven't put in promotion relegation yet, I can buy my way up anyway, right? So there's real incentive to dip your toe into the cheaper league before you really take the plunge. And that's not a bug. I think that's a feature of how the USL is shaping itself up.
Now, I have a follow-up on this question because, of course, hypothetically speaking, again, if everything is roses, peachy, let's talk optimistically for a second, right? And 10 years from now, League One is an established league. There's probably at least 20 teams in it for giggles. Let's just use that as a number example. And there really starts to be a push where people start really talking about this whole promotion relegation thing. There's a question of how that would even work when everybody that is in this league has had to pay a franchise fee to get in. And how do you make this fair where a team that's like an inaugural team, like say, what is it? I think Chattanooga is an inaugural League One team. How is it fair where they could potentially earn promotion into USL Championship while like a Miami had to drop some cash to get in? Just as an example.
It's a fair example, 100%. The answer is it's not fair. But that is something that every person who has started a soccer club in the United States over the last 25 years, dating back to 1995, has agreed to, is that this is my club, and either it operates in this league or I have a say in changing the way soccer in this country works. So there's a lot of talk of owners who do you worry about depreciating value? And this conversation happens a lot more in regards to Major League Soccer than it does in the championship. Why? USL Championship are already asking the players for pickups in a very significant way, despite them not making significant wages. This is a bigger question for them. But I think it's one that the public tends to answer and say, like, well, they're screwed, right? But maybe they're not. Maybe there's a way where you say ESPN is much more interested in the USL as an entity if there's promotion and relegation. How much more? Well, maybe 10 times as much. How much is 10 times as much? Suddenly $10 million in your TV deal. That's a little better. So maybe there's a way you can offer parachute payments. The other thing, though, is that this country doesn't live and die off of promotion and relegation because we've never had to. As a footballing nation, if you're going to borrow the parlance of your coach. And so as a result of that, we're not going to stop going to Rowdies games if they get relegated. There are very few people who would say, like, it's not worth it. It's the third division. I know they stole the names. They blatantly stole the names of England, but it's not the same stakes. It's not Sunderland Till I Die. It's not whatever the Leeds documentary is called, because I don't have an Amazon Prime subscription anymore. Like, it's your team. You can't afford to drive to another team because our country is too big. So you're going to keep going to the one in your market. And so I don't think there's as much of a risk, and I'm going to include MLS in this, by the way. I don't think there's as much of a risk of clubs getting bankrupted, but especially in the USL, because that TV deal isn't so astronomically bigger. Right now, the MLS deal is. It's 130 times or something like that bigger than the USL TV contract. That drop hurt. But the drop from the championship to League One, you have to book flights and find hotels in Omaha, Nebraska, and Madison, Wisconsin. But is that difficult? Is that any worse than Rio Grande Valley or Hartford, Hartford, Connecticut, depending where you're located? No, not at all. I don't think that fans would be any less interested in their local club if they played in League One than if they played in the championship.
I agree. I mean,
Yeah.
the fact that we still meet Tampa Bay Rowdies people, or not even necessarily Rowdies, but even just general sports fans that think that the Rowdies right now are all amateurs, that they have no concept that, there's, even as of like 2 years ago, there were people making like 6 figures a year playing for that team. People don't, even in our market as an established club, if you want to call us that, we don't even have any, people have no concept of what this level is. So yeah, I agree with you. I don't think people would necessarily care a whole lot because there wouldn't visually be much of a difference in the day to day. Now, I have one question though. I for me, and not really think, but more of an opinion. I've always believed the pro rel thing could work because I don't necessarily believe that it's a death knell per se, but I do believe firmly that if you're going to have promotion, you have those owners, the only teams that could be eligible for it. Obviously, you have to win your division or whatever. In this case, Division 3.
Right.
But you have to be able to put some money into the pot. You have to be able to make up. Like, people can't just get up for free and not put more skin in the game. Obviously, it's one thing to do parachute payments for the teams going down, but I honestly don't believe that you can't have promotion unless those Division 3 teams in this case can put up money. I don't think it could be possible. Now, I don't know if that's contingent on the whole thing happening in general, but that's always something that I have felt. Because I think, to me, that kind of balances out some of that financial fairness in that way.
Yeah. I buy that. I really do. But I think that there's also going to be bigger questions about how did you set up your League One club? And maybe you're looking and saying, well, then you get into another discussion, right? Where you're saying, like, did the clubs that launched the USL in 2011, if they're still around, and most of them died, unfortunately, which is a bummer because I love the Rochester Rhinos, but then you're looking at the clubs who joined in 2015, okay, before the NASL pulled them, the ones who got in for $1 million. Do they suddenly owe more money than Queensborough, who have had to pay $10 million? Because you're going to have to balance that scale at some point. I don't think you can look at entry fee because, if I'm being honest, it's not that big of a range between $1 million and $10 million, really. Like, it is to me as a human, because I don't make it close to $1 million.
Right.
Not even close. It's a joke, really. But once you're at that level and you're willing to buy a soccer club and operate it and pay for every single expense of it, you're in, and you have an investment. Where it gets bigger is this thing that apparently no one was talking about until today, which is the sanctioning laws. And the sanctioning laws are so different for the second division and the third division that you can promote Omaha. I'm just going to pick on Omaha because, whatever, they're new and they haven't played a game yet. So people should remember that Union Omaha are out there. They have a great press. That's all we know about them right now. But if you're looking at Union Omaha, they would have to have a stadium that could house 5,000 people to play in the second division.
Right.
For the first division, it's like 1,500 or 2,000, or for the third division, it's like 1,500 or 2,000 fans. They have to more than double that to be eligible. And leagues get X number of waivers where they can say, okay, this one's 3,000. And so that's one of ours. And so that's one of our bad marks, and that's one of our stats on our wrist, whatever. And we can only handle 10 stats before we fold or something. I don't know. There's a certain number, there's a threshold of waivers that they can claim. And each of these are things exactly like seating, soccer-specific stadia, all of that stuff. So if Omaha can't find a 5,000 seat stadium because they play in a baseball park, and maybe they only have it set up for 2,500, they haven't come up with the final seating total. Well, maybe they have by now, but when I was down there last fall for the press reveal, they had not. So they would have to find more, or they'd have to find a different place that still meets the competitive quality standards. They would have to have a principal owner who maybe, because it's $10 million for a third division, it's $20 million, I believe, for a second division. That one's in my article. Check that out and fact check me. But he would need to have a benefactor to be eligible for that league. So there are so many other things where, the entry fee is a bummer, but they're going to pay that in dues. They're going to have to pay that in upgrading their own team. Where I think, maybe you have to pay $1 or $2 million but I don't think you have to bridge the gap to 8 or 9, depending on when you joined League One personally.
You you said you were picking on Omaha a lot. I've been sitting over here creating this fictional Fargo-Madison rivalry in my head. I think that would be pretty.
I would absolutely love it. I'd be caught in the middle of it. It's the closest thing I'd have to an actual team to cover.
You guys,
by the way, about being the guy who covers the USL for the Athletic is that there's no team in Minnesota.
Right.
So if I'm going to a game, like I'm like driving or flying somewhere and staying at hotels for nights and whatever, really trying to make a meal out of my time while I'm down there. But go ahead.
I'm just imagining, like when the whole quarantine started, I think I binged the whole Fargo TV series from FX. I'd never watched it. So now I'm imagining like those people playing, the Flamingos, and it's just this wild. But I want to go to. We'll finish up here. One thing you mentioned in there, which I swore I didn't share our show notes with you on, like wasn't keeping it secret, but you've managed to like segue into everything pretty perfectly. The USL fan survey, which I hopped on and put mine in there, and I'll give you my my plan for how promotion relegation will work. But and then you two can pick it apart, because I'm sure I've completely overlooked something. Like part of it depends on there being a lot more teams in League One to begin with, which I'm just foreseeing in the future. But tell us a little bit more about it. Like, how long are you collecting these replies? Have you sneaked any peeks at what people have been saying so far? What's going on with the survey?
I have looked. I closed it last Saturday at 11,000 that would be fun. 1,103. 1,103, which is about what we got for our NWSL survey before we closed it, and over half of what we got for the MLS one before we closed it. So it's a big enough sample size where I feel like it's going to represent some pocket of national USL fans, which is great. And I know there weren't team-specific questions, but a drop-down menu doesn't work well on our mobile app, and apparently embedding in general doesn't work well on our mobile app. We found out through doing all these surveys. So I wanted, and then if I did a multiple choice where you just click one box, I'm listing a 47-team option, and people are going to stop scrolling at the first question. If I'm like, okay, find it, and then, it's separated by conferences, soccer, League One's at the bottom, like that would be awful. So I just skipped that question. People have asked me about that, that's why. There's been very interesting stuff. Ray Beshoff is not a popular guy among people from Fresno. Ray Beshoff is the owner of Fresno FC, who is now bringing that team to Monterey, California. He is not terribly appreciated. There's some other really interesting stuff. I mean, like I did a whole kind of rank your preferences between promotion relegation stadiums, USL and video games, CONCACAF Champions League, expand the league, MLS, 2 teams dropping down, start a women's league, and getting your academies up to speed across the country. And the number one priority was not promotion and relegation. It was not academies. It was improving stadiums. It was getting teams out of ballparks. It was making sure that the teams that play in really terrible conditions are in a better spot. It was very interesting for me to see that I just pulled it up as you asked me that. That's almost 60% of fans think that the USL is too big, and that 24.7% think there should be only 36 or 38 in the leagues at 35, and 17% thought it should be 40 or more. So like, there's a serious question to be asked about how do you change a league that's already too big, and how many teams can you force down to League One before it starts looking like you're picking favorites, which you would have to do at that point. Fans are very confident in the direction of the USL. I think on average, on a scale of 1 to 10, by far the most popular answer was an 8 out of 10. And when asked what the biggest concern is, a lot of people just said COVID. There are a lot of people who are pretty confident in the direction of it. And again, this all came out, the survey closed before the counter proposal, and the counter proposal came out over the last 48 hours. Yeah,
I was gonna say this. It'd be interesting to rerun that question now that they've started negotiating through Twitter.
It would be. Oh, trust me. In theory, I would love to do that, but I don't know if there's a way that I could collect 1,100 responses or 11,000, like I said last time. More out of 1,100 fans. Over half of them had traveled to an away day, which I thought was really impressive, considering like, yeah, some of them are a little bit easier. You know, Tampa to Miami won't be that difficult. Or when you start looking at, you know, Charlotte to the Triangle to play North Carolina FC, that's not too bad. But some of them might have traveled quite a ways, depending how isolated they are, especially when you look at the Western Conference. I thought that was pretty interesting as well. I mean, there's a lot of. I should really get this done by the end of the week, shouldn't I? Thanks. Okay. I know it's going to be like that, but you know, there's 27 questions. I feel very good about these answers. It gives a lot to think about, and it's certainly given me at least quite a bit to think about, especially when you look at which market the fans want most for the championship, and you each get one guess. Where do you think the most USL fans want to see a championship club?
I know what I said.
What did you say? I mean, that's good enough too.
I want Baltimore.
Okay, yeah.
I want bring back the Baltimore Bohemians. I've gone to I went to Baltimore for a Liverpool Tottenham game. Like, it was a cool little part of town in the whole Inner Harbor area. That, if I had to pick one, especially one I'd like to go to, in Baltimore.
Baltimore's a solid choice.
I think for me, selfishly, I'd have to go with Jacksonville, just because I feel terrible that those guys aren't playing right now, and I have a lot of friends up there that are that even with their amateur stuff are still season ticket holders, you know. And so I've got a sentimental connection to the guys up in Jacksonville, so that would be my pick.
And it's a really strong pick, right? I think you're looking at, like, they're not the only one either, where it's like this city is such a good second division market that it's just a shame that they aren't. I mean, you're also looking at the New York Cosmos. You're looking at the Oakland Roots. You're looking at Chattanooga FC, not Red Bulls, probably. You're looking at Detroit City, but I don't think that Detroit City wants anything to do with that. But you're looking at them and saying, like, oh, that should be at a higher level than they're at, right? Jacksonville is right there in that conversation. I completely agree they're overlooked. Neither of you were right, but I like both answers, and both were among the top five, so that's not bad, right? Number one was New Orleans, and I am so on board with the idea of New Orleans being in the USL Championship.
I'm just kind of Googling right now. I want to see how far. I made the drive not last season, 2 years ago. I went to Charlotte, and 10-hour drive, checked into the hotel, got to the stadium, met up with Ben, the Soccer Goose, and then there was like an hour and a half rain delay.
Matt, you say like something like that's impressive somehow. Charlotte?
Okay.
That's your most impressive?
With a 10-year-old. With a 10-year-old. New Orleans 10.5 hours, so it's equivalent to doing that.
Oh, that's easy.
Yeah, it's that really crappy stretch of I-10, you know, from like Lake City past Mobile, because that's like just the most boring drive in the world. It's awful.
Go through the Midwest sometime. You'll love most of it, I promise.
This is probably the closest to what it feels like.
I can absolutely attest to that. Iowa is the most desolate place on planet Earth.
Man.
I'm pretty much convinced of that. There's just nothing there.
We were just talking about Iowa at dinner. My wife went to a convention in Iowa City years ago, like a work conference, and I said, "Oh, there's a
Iowa City confirmed, by the way. There you go."
I was like, "Wow, there's a third city in Iowa."
That's the city. They have a club in League One. Like, it's really crazy how the USL expands, but that's just part of it. I don't know.
I knew there was Cedar Rapids and Des Moines. I didn't know there was a third city in Iowa. That's impressive.
Dubuque is a fourth. It's crazy because, like, I drove down to Des Moines for an Open Cup game where they were hosting St. Louis FC last year. And I decided to drive back after the game. And that's like, you know, it's like a 4-hour drive, like, which is not that bad. But when you're driving through all of Iowa at about 10:30, you're getting back to Minneapolis, St. Paul at 2. Man, that is like one of the last times to date, it'll change, I'm sure, that I have like purchased a pair of Red Bulls at a gas station at 1 a.m. just to not crash.
That's awful.
It was a whole... Yeah, it brought me back. It really brought me back.
So before I tell you mine, because I'm trying to delay the embarrassment whenever you guys pick apart the obvious thing that I missed, were there any promotion relegation plans that stood out to you as being particularly interesting from the survey?
There's one that was really interesting, which factored in the conferences, and I thought that was really good. And they said you need to grow League One big enough to have equal conferences. So if we're talking about your Central Conference, then you need to have 3 in the USL League One. Otherwise, if you just grin and bear it, then you have East and West. And then that way you can also say these clubs are feeding in there's reason to worry and only focus on your conference and not just be saying like, oh, well, there are 3 terrible teams in the East. We're going to be totally fine, which is going to be something you would run into unless they go open table. But actually expanding it enough where you have, what did they want to do? 2 teams rise, 2 teams fall, 3rd place. 3 fall, and then you do the promotion playoff like England does it, not like Germany. And so you're not having those teams play at the end of it. You're just sending them up, but you have it so conference-ly aligned. I think that's really interesting, and I think that solves one huge question, which is like, I'm just picking out independent clubs in League One. This is no hint of anything, but can Greenville Triumph afford to suddenly be booking flights to Tacoma and Sacramento if they're still around by then, or Boise, or if they go into the league or whatever? Like, can they afford those flights? Maybe not. Maybe not right away. Maybe they can in 2 years. But if they're only playing in the East, that's a lot easier for them to stomach.
Okay, so that might have been my plan.
Good stuff.
So,
there you go.
because
I would have been touched with their plan too, and it was very similar to that.
Yeah, because my thing is you can't drop like 3 teams from the East and nobody from the West. Like it's so right. I think I had it where the bottom 2 in the East and the bottom the bottom teams in the East and West automatically dropped. Then the next 2 in each conference, you'd have like a 4-team playoff. The winners stay up. The team that loses is going to play. From League One, you'd have the top 2 teams come up automatically, or it was like the playoff champion plus the regular season champion, something like that, automatically came up. And then the next highest team played the loser from. See, I can tell from the video.
I just want a diagram so bad.
Yes, it's like it's the Charlie Day gif with the board in the background.
Pepe Sylvia. Like, where is he? Yeah. Okay, I think I get most of it, and I think that you're right too. Like, there should be some way. I personally love the German idea of like fight for your right.
Yeah.
But I think that first leg should be in the League One stadium.
Okay.
So they get to kick it off because, like, if you're just playing at the championship, like the championship club is going to be a little cagey. They're going to score first, and then they're going to bunker in, and they don't have to worry about a away goal, and the second leg starts. But if they're starting it in Madison, and like you have all of these drunk Madisonians who are really excited about the idea of playing against Hartford Athletic next year, and they're just so bought into playing Hartford Athletic that they are going to go and play the Charlotte Independent in this game, and they're hosting them, and they're just going to try to pummel them, and they're going to be so on the front foot. That game is going to be so wide open because it's the chance to really strangle the advantage in this before then you go back to the championship one, and it's like, all right, if you're going to do this in front of your own fans. If you can't, you have to face the music there, and they get to win promotion outside of their stadium, which feels weird, but they'd have an amazing away section at that point, probably. I think that having a game like that would be arguably as interesting to a TV broadcaster, if not more, than the USL Championship Final, if I'm being completely honest.
Yeah.
Because that's a game where the cities are just so invested, there's stakes, people know exactly what's going to be happening at the end of it, whereas after a playoff, it's a playoff. And Louisville's going to be back in the final again next year anyway, so, like, who cares about that, right? So I think that's the way you do it. Yeah, personally, I think that's an important game to have.
Yeah, because you need to find a way to build in some excitement into that. You know, in England it's great. You know, I was reading something on the story on The Athletic about like the behind the scenes at Sunderland, and it's great. We stayed up on the last day. Yeah, but if you have like a playoff thing where you're still that's on the line, like, I think it's a higher level of excitement. Well,
I think it's a lot of fun.
Yeah. It's fun to watch too, especially for like you get neutrals involved in that one too. Like, oh, this will be fun. Let's see who we might end up playing next year. Let's start planning road trips. All right. Well, I think we've run through everything. Appreciate you coming on. Where can people find you online to find links to your articles?
Rueter, and everything I do is at The Athletic, except for like my random podcast radio shows, which I enjoy doing a lot because I don't have my own show. So I just like hack other people, which is great. So thank you for having me on, and keep up the good work, guys.
All right. Well, we'll have to do this again when and if, and hopefully it's when, not if, the season starts again.
Sounds great. Yeah.
All right, Jeff. Thanks for joining us. We will talk to you soon and continue to try and summarize your stuff without giving away all the content for free.
We appreciate that. Thank you.
All right.
Thank you so much for joining us, Jeff.
Just a second. We'll go over the last couple things. All we really were going to talk about after this was the esports results. So Malik Johnson competed last night for Rowdy's Gaming, took on, I believe it was Birmingham, won that game. I want to say it was 5-2. Competed tonight before we came on against Las Vegas Lights, won that game 4-1. It was 1-0 going into halftime. 1-1 early in there, about 15 minutes in the second half, and then Malik went nuts and had 3 more goals, including 1 in stoppage time. Almost had another. He will go on and play tomorrow night against Pittsburgh at 7:30, and I'm not 100% sure of the layout for this, but I believe I'll have to go and check the USL site that we have won promotion to Group A for next week. After missing out on it last week, it looks like we'll move up this week into the Final Four. So congratulations to Malik. So tune in tomorrow night, 7:30 p.m. at twitch.tv/rowdiesgaming. They usually come on about a half hour before the game starts, do a little chat session, little Q&A, little intro to esports if you haven't watched or participated before. Other than that, that was it. Thank you again to Jeff for joining us. Appreciate it. That was a lot of fun. We love yous. I'm gonna send it out on behalf of Steven and I to Malik Johnson for his 2 big wins in the E-Cup last night and tonight. Thank you to Wolfface, to Radio St. Pete, and to Shamrock for all the support and all the love. We appreciate it. Thank you to everyone who listens live or finds time in their daily routine later. Please continue to share, subscribe, rate, and review. If you'd like to support us on an ongoing basis, go to patreon.com/unusedsubspod. You can donate as little as $1 a month. It actually does help out. We have a bunch of people that do $1, and they are fantastic. Best way to support the show. We have different levels all the way up to, I think, a max of is $10. You can choose to donate more, but that's kind of the highest level that we set. Thank you to our sponsor, Roughneck Scarves, the official scarf supplier to MLS, USL, and US Soccer. Get custom scarves for your group or team at roughneckscarves.com. Pretty sure they're doing face masks now too. If you're going to have some of those, if you need some of those for going out, going to work, whatever, check out Roughneck Scarves. They should call them roughneck masks, maybe. I don't know. If you are tired of the same old uniforms and cookie-cutter templates from Nike and Adidas, and you're looking for a unique, completely custom kit for your youth club, your Sunday League squad, adult, or even pro team, Icarus FC can help you create the kit of your dreams at an affordable price. Let them help you design your new custom kit today at IcarusFC.com. That's it. Thank you guys for joining us. We'll be back next week with hopefully like a more Rowdy's news kind of show. Hopefully there'll be some stuff going on that we can talk about. If not, we'll just work out another interview. This worked out really good. Thank you guys for listening. We'll talk to you soon. See ya.
The Rowdies were here, the Rowdies were there, they kicked the wall.